Let me introduce our speaker for today, Stephen, and our knowledge manager for the OGTC, David, here. So first of all, Stephen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Bonner. I'm a partner with Deloitte, where I focus on cyber risk services and privacy. I've spent 20 years of my career working in industry defending organizations. The last 6 years, I've been helping organizations, consulting with them to prepare themselves to manage their cyber risk.
Excellent. And what are you going to talk to us about today, Stephen?
So I'm going to give you a 20-minute view. Oh, there we go. Technology's working. I've got to keep my elbows in. I'm going to be talking a little bit about cybersecurity risks to oil and gas, and particularly drawing out where do these risks come from, what are those organizations trying to get, and what you can do to try and reduce that risk.
Excellent. Thank you. And David, can you tell us a little bit about why this is of interest to the OGTC and the industry in general?
Yeah. Just like every other industry, Just like every other industry, ours is becoming increasingly reliant on digital infrastructure. You couple that with the value of the assets that we have and the potential damage that a successful cyber attack could deliver. It's really important that we as an industry understand the evolution of the threat and how we can protect ourselves against it.
Excellent. Thanks very much, David. And on that note, I'll hand over to Stephen. Your 20 minutes start now.
There's nothing quite as off-putting as having your life tick down in the background. So forgive me if I look increasingly panicked as time goes on. So we do have plenty of time for questions at the end. But if there's something that I say that makes no sense or is wrong, do shout out and we'll cover it in the questions, but I want to capture it. So it's called today Canary in the Coal Mine, because what I hope to leave you with is just a little bit of a thought. This isn't the biggest risk that you face, but it is a risk that's developing. And one of the problems with a risk that's developing is knowing when it is time to take action over it, when there is need to lift attention and do more. So what I hope to leave you with a few suggestions of what's happening in your industry, and particularly in similar industries, that gives you an indication of what is coming. And by knowing what's coming and knowing when to pay attention, hopefully you can take the right steps to protect yourselves. Make sense? Very good. So, our first question is, who's out to get you? Well, I like to divide the world of kind of threats into 4 key groups. It starts with organized crime. There are people who like to steal money. You have money, so people want to steal your money. It's a fairly straightforward motive. It's actually one of the easiest ones to manage the risk around because they're economically motivated. If you can make it more expensive to steal your money than they can get away with money, they're not going to target you, they're going to go somewhere else. And that makes it manageable, and you can understand their motivations. But it is absolutely a threat across many sectors, including yours, and we'll touch on to the ways it likely impacts your sector. But there are those trying to make money. But not everyone is motivated by money. We also see a set of threats from nations. Nearly every nation on the planet is investing heavily in developing offensive cyber capabilities to disrupt, to spy on, to gain access to other nations. And historically, this was very focused on military and diplomatic targets, but increasingly now they're looking to expand this into economic targets and economic espionage, and increasingly hints of developing sabotage capabilities, so that in times of geopolitical tension, nations can use cyber attacks to make points to each other to get political concessions. And unfortunately, critical infrastructure like yourselves can be caught in the middle of that. But it's not just criminals and nations. We also see what we sort of class hacktivists, those who are pushing a particular agenda but have been driven to extremist behavior in that agenda. This might be animal rights extremists or environmental extremists who have a particular axe to grind. They likely have lower technical capability than some of the nations and organized crime groups, but they have a level of persistence that is entirely disproportionate. And unlike the other two, sometimes they want to get caught to take these kind of issues to court to cause political embarrassment, media attention. And that brings us neatly onto the 4th group, which are journalists and the media. They're also interested in using, and as we've seen in things like the phone hacking scandal, perfectly comfortable using electronic attack to gain information and knowledge to then publish to draw attention to behaviors that they don't align with. So those are the kind of threats that are out there. What are they trying to get at? Well, there are sort of 4 core capabilities within your technological areas that they may be interested in. They're either trying to steal money, as we've talked about, they're trying to steal data, they're trying to steal bandwidth, and they're trying to steal compute power. And when we address these kind of capabilities against the oil and gas industry, there's a few things that sort of stand out. They're absolutely targeting across all industries attempting to take money. And one of the most common ways this is done at the moment is something called business email compromise. So this is where an attacker will impersonate a CEO or a senior member of an organization, will write an email to the CFO and say, we've just finished this takeover, it's urgent, we need you to transfer all this money to this account to complete the deal, do it now, it's very important, I'll fire you if you don't get it done right away. And last year in the UK, 996 of these cases were significant enough that were reported into the fraud authorities and were recorded. The largest of which got away with £18.5 million from a UK company based on one email being sent. Now, in your organisations, I'm sure you have extensive controls about transferring money out of the organisation. I can definitely reassure you as I attempt to get my expenses done every month, I can assure you our organisation has extensive controls to stop money getting out of the organisation. But what's fascinating in these organisations where this worked is that because someone senior demanded it, those controls were not applied effectively. Now, this is an interesting question if you think about in your organisation, when there are times of stress or pressure, do people stand up and do the right thing? Is there a culture of doing what needs to be done correctly to protect the organisation, or are many of the security controls, many of the finance controls, seen sort of annoying inconvenience which can be turned off when it's not very necessary? We do them when the auditors arrive, we don't do them during normal business. And I think there's something telling about those organisations. But it's not just money being taken by stealing the money. There's an interesting trend has occurred where there was a technology outside oil and gas, but it has some parallels, where a medical company invented an implanted heart pacemaker. This is a device surgically implanted in those who have heart problems, and when your heart stops, it automatically detects that and restarts the heart with an electric shock. And the electric shocks can stop the heart, maintain a pace, or start the heart. That's what it's there for. And this device was designed to operate with a cable, plugged into a cable and had a box that the doctor could work with. And as they upgraded it, they were able to eliminate the cable and go to a wireless connection, which has huge improvements for the patients. Having a cable hang out of you is a terrible risk of actual viruses, not computer viruses, but actual viruses. So a different kind of problem than I have to deal with day in and out. By removing that cable, they dramatically reduced the risks to the patients. And by connecting that wireless connection out into an internet connection, they dramatically improved the monitoring for those patients. Cardiologists could see what was happening over time, detect trends, call people in for checkups when they needed them. Very similar, I would suggest, to some of the digital monitoring occurring in other industries. Now, unfortunately, a security research team began investigating this, and because the pacemaker was designed to have a physical cable, they just copied the same level of security for the physical cable as you would have for that into the electronic wireless and then the internet connection. And they found a whole series, it's alleged they found, a whole series of security vulnerabilities. Now, what's telling at this point is, did they go, this was in America, did they go to the FDA and report these problems so the regulator could take action and fix it? No, they didn't. Did they notify the manufacturer to warn them there was this problem in their components so they could take action and protect the patients? No, they didn't. They went to a hedge fund and got funding to short the stock and then publish the vulnerabilities publicly to damage that share price to make profit from the security vulnerabilities they'd found. Now, because it's America, everyone involved is suing everyone else, as you might expect, so it's not quite clear yet what the outcome will be, but there are definitely groups who aren't criminals but are just trying to make money using these security vulnerabilities. And it's worth thinking that exactly same model of where the security was perfectly appropriate for an isolated device may not be appropriate if that is now connected together and connected externally, which I think is a trend that is inevitable because of the benefits it brings, but absolutely changes the kind of security angle. Now, when we look to the life cycle within oil and gas, at one end we sort of have exploration and production, and within that security risks are changing quite a lot. I was tangentially involved in some work years ago around well data being stolen. This data was being stolen to help with making sure the bids were the best bids for the data, understanding what other people thought the value was so they could take advantage. And it was quite telling. One of the challenges we see about security is that generally defenders have to be right all the time. They have to build perfect systems, they have to construct and operate them perfectly, and they have to make no mistakes. And sadly, that isn't possible. So nearly every system that's deployed is vulnerable in some way. And generally, a good attacker will always gain access if they really put their time and effort into it. But what's fascinating is once they gain access, they become the defender. The people protecting the organization have to catch them, and they only have to make one mistake to get caught, and they have to use infrastructure to launch these attacks. So in the case of this well data being stolen, a research team was involved in, they were able to compromise the attackers' systems they were using to launch the attacks. They'd break into a third party, take over the systems, launch the attacks from there, like sort of stealing a getaway car. But we were able to gain access to the getaway car and could see where it was going and what it was doing. The metaphorical getaway car, there's no actual cars involved in this. But as well as stealing that well data, they were also stealing fashion designs, and they also targeted a yoga studio to steal a list of people who were attending a Dalai Lama event. So that can give you some kind of sense of the targeting and behaviors of the organizations potentially interested in this. Now, when we move to sort of the transportation and into refining kind of side of things, here you see, particularly sort of at the edge of the exploration side, there is large amounts of processing involved, simulations, other things like that, large amounts of compute power available. An interesting change in the last few years about risk is increasingly compute power is of interest to attackers. Historically it wasn't, there wasn't much they could do, there was no way to make money, but now because of cryptocurrencies and crypto mining, if you have access to vast pools of computing power, you can make significant money, and in a way that's relatively difficult to trace and gain access to. I'm unaware of any specific examples within oil and gas, but there's two interesting ones. There's a large electric car manufacturer had their simulation system for aerodynamics compromised and used to mine cryptocurrency. And there was a nation whose some of its scientists in its nuclear research program, instead of using the supercomputers to model nuclear reactions, instead were using the supercomputers to mine cryptocurrencies for their personal benefit. Truly embracing innovation and technology, I suppose, on one level, but perhaps not what the nation had in mind. But as we move then into transportation and refining, here we see the biggest change. The industrial control systems that have traditionally been isolated are now being connected. And these nations, and occasionally organized criminals behind this kind of behavior, are drawing themselves into gaining footholds within these environments. To make a political point to disrupt critical infrastructure is of great interest to many of the players in this space. And oil and gas is becoming a target for this kind of behavior. It's not just, there are others that are also being targeted, but it's absolutely a component of it. So what can you do about this? Is there a kind of magic trick that solves the problem? Well, in our world, we look at four kind of core things you can take away and do things about, which are setting a strategy and being secure, vigilant, and resilient. When we look at strategy, this is around one of the sort of big questions is how much is enough? Where are the warning signs that let you know you need to invest more? And where are you wasting money in having so much security that it's not adding value? And a lot of the work here is around really understanding. And it's quite telling because organizations that profit from protecting security, a little bit like myself, we may be motivated to over-egg the problem. I hope I'm not doing that today. I hope I'm bringing you realistic examples. But there's a danger. You may sensibly conclude that I'm here to scare you a little bit. However, the people who suffer the problems, they're motivated to cover it up and not draw attention to the issue. So it's one of the interesting areas that it's very hard to get an accurate view of what is actually happening and what you should do about it. So a big part of any strategy is paying attention to the horizon and seeing what's coming. And ironically, I'm getting called into a lot of boards at the moment to talk about cybersecurity. We did a review of FTSE 100 board reporting in the UK. 99 of the FTSE 100 mention cyber somewhere in their annual board report. I'm going to get the 100th this year, so next year it'll be 100%. But up to now, it's 99%. And when I talk to those boards, one of the points I end with every time is that cyber is an emerged risk. This is not an emerging risk. There may be uncertainty about some of it, but this is definitely a problem now. Boards, and perhaps yourselves, should be spending time as well working out what are the risks that aren't fully emerged yet, looking ahead and thinking about that, as well as, obviously, doing a lot with cyber. I'm still biased for my own little area, but there is a broader question about how you manage that risk and how that fits into your strategy. Now, the first sort of core area within any good strategy is around securing your environment, making sure that obsolete and outdated technology is updated, is protected, that patches are applied effectively, that things are kept up to date. And another core element of that is training, making sure that your staff are aware of this. We do a lot of work running fake phishing attacks, where we will send phishing emails to organizations and see what proportion respond. And it's quite interesting looking at the differences between those who are in the field and those who are in head office and areas like that, differences by different countries. A lot of it can be drawn out about where cultures are focused on safety and security and where cultures are a little bit less focused on that. So those kind of secure capabilities are well worth doing it. But however high you build the walls, I once had the pleasure, I've spent my entire career on the defensive side, once had the pleasure of having a decent chat with someone who sat on the offensive side, worked for a nation, breaking into organizations like the ones I was tasked with protecting. And I thought life was like this complex game of chess where I would make careful moves to defend myself and he would counter and understand. I mean, hopefully it wasn't just him, but the other side. And he just laughed at me and said, no, we can break into anything, anywhere we want. Our problem is not breaking in, it's knowing what to do once we're in there. He was particularly focused on gaining actionable intelligence. So his problem was, when he breaks into an organization, yes, he's got access to their intranet and all their file shares, he can go anywhere he likes. Finding the key plans are a very difficult problem within that space. Organizations often have multiple versions, some of them are out of date. I even worked once with a client who decided to, in order to confuse attackers, they would have 2 copies of a critical bid they were working on. So there were 2 different prices, and if an attacker got in, they wouldn't tell which one was the real one. Slightly undermined by a member of staff sending an email to everyone involved in the project saying, remember, server 2 is the fake one. Clearly you follow that up with email saying, of course, I'm just kidding, in that, but at that point you may have lost a little bit of your control. But his point was, he can gain access to these systems, but getting them to do what he wants is the challenging part. And there's one of the sort of absolute clear points that has come very much in the public domain was the Western powers' work to disrupt Middle Eastern countries' nuclear weapons program. And they had a whole series of industrial control systems working to purify nuclear materials, and their system was air-gapped from the internet and had the death penalty for anyone who didn't follow their security guidance. Now, I don't really recommend that to my clients. That's a pretty extreme view, but even that environment was completely hacked. And one of the ways it was completely hacked, quite interesting, because it was so distinct, was that when a South Mediterranean country gave up its nuclear program, it provided all its materials to the Americans. It gave them the centrifuges that had been leaked from the same Southeast Asian country who'd shared this technology. And they were able to build a fake copy and practice over and over again in the fake environment before they could launch their attack against the real environment using a similar setup over memory sticks that were compromised. Support engineers were induced or tricked into bringing those into the environment and installing them into the environment. And what was telling about that attack, that I think resonates very much, is they didn't just switch things off. Instead, they altered the telemetry coming from the systems so the operators believed the systems were operating correctly while subtly altering it so the product coming out of the other end did not meet the spec. And this led to only being detected far down the chain of development that the raw materials, although tested and produced with things giving the right answer, did not operate effectively. And this undermining the confidence in the end-to-end process is absolutely relevant to the worlds that you operate in. And we are seeing adversaries gain footholds and map and understand these components to start disrupting the view of what's happening within environments. And that can only be to cause problems in the future. But security is not enough. You also need to be vigilant, to monitor your environments and detect this kind of behavior. We're seeing quite a rise, because you have the home field advantage, you can generate deception. You can add devices into your environment that aren't legitimate. And if anyone contacts that or connects to it, you know it's an attack. One of the key problems with monitoring is telling what is approved behavior and what is unimproved. So if you build an environment where everything is not approved, then you know it's the case. A simple example I use about this in HR departments is you put a file on the HR file server called salaryandbonus.xls. Now that's not the authorized one, but if anyone is opening that file, you know something suspicious is happening. But it's not enough to just be secure and vigilant. You also need to be resilient. And this is the area where in last year, we saw a dramatic change in the attack landscape. Nations moved beyond espionage into active sabotage, disrupting systems, and we've seen some organised crime groups start building the same capability and start sort of coming up to organisations saying, that's a nice company you have there, wouldn't it be a shame if all your data and systems were broken, maybe you should pay us a little bit to keep you running. It's what some of my clients think I do to them, but I really don't. I don't extort, I'm there to help. But this has led to a change in thinking. What would you do if everything went away? How would you rebuild? And because technology has worked so well over the last few years, most organizations have just considered, if we lose this data center, how do we fail over to the second one? And actually have invested large amounts of money making sure data is copied really quickly between all these data centers. It works great if the adversary is a fire or a power cut or flooding in the storms or overheating in the nice weather. But if the attacker is an adversary and they put in their malicious software, all that replication immediately copies the data into all the data centers and takes out all the information. So it's a very different mindset about thinking about how you would recover. This particular client we helped lost everything. They lost their email system. They lost the phone system because it was voice over IP. They lost their mobile phones because they were running over a managed service from the central Windows environment. So they ran the whole company for about a week and a half just on WhatsApp. Was their technology for running their entire company, and had to rebuild the whole thing from scratch. They had to send our team out to buy all the memory sticks they could from nearby corner stores to have enough technology to be able to replicate build images to rebuild laptops, because there was no network, because there were no servers. And facing that, the model is to have a store, a vault, where you can keep this information and be able to rebuild should you have a problem. So if you have a good strategy, you're secure as much as you can, but you're vigilant to incidents and you're aware it goes wrong, then you need to be resilient. You'll be in a good place. Any questions?
Okay, hold on. Can I just
sorry,
ask
yes,
you to...
let's get you a mic.
It's okay,
Sorry.
just wait for the mic, just so we can
Mic's
pick it
just
up
there.
on the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just on your last point there about copying the data over, how secure is cloud computing then? Would you class that as not secure enough? And say the vault, would you have it, like you were saying about the nuclear reactor site, how that was completely offline? Would that be the best solution?
So the marvellous thing about being an expert is you can marvellously say it depends on every single question and move on as if you've answered it. So I'll try and avoid that too much. But generally, the people who are building those systems are trying to make them as simple as possible, because they have to operate in a failure, a massive failure. So it's possible, one of the things that failed, if this problem, what's been interesting about those attacks last summer is they only impacted a very few. It was terrible for the organizations who were impacted, but it did not have industry-wide or infrastructure-wide issues. But there's no reason why you couldn't write some code that would disrupt, say, every internet router, and there would be no internet for several days. And when I talk to engineers about it, that's fine, we Google for the result. And you're like, no, you don't understand. Oh, we download the pack. No, you really haven't got it. There's no internet. There's nothing you can do. And in those cases, having it locally on systems they understand and physically separate is generally reassuring. However, if your threat is a physical attack damaging the building, then having them off-site in computing infrastructure not managed by yourself might reduce the risk. If your sysadmin goes crazy and corrupts everything, having a system run by a cloud provider may make that less likely. However, because everybody is putting critical data in the cloud providers, that makes them a very interesting target for attackers. If they can get in to the backbone, they can corrupt a lot of things from one place. So it depends is the unfortunate answer. But at least you can see those are the kind of things you have to bear in mind when doing that balance. But particularly for the complete recovery, generally people are going for on-site, physically disconnected, under their control. Sort of at the most basic level, this is printing out the phone numbers and license keys. In that organization, their backup system was wiped, but the system that stored the license keys to allow the backup software to be installed and run was also wiped. So something as basic as printing out the keys for your backup system and putting them in the bottom of your drawer is actually a pretty effective defense to at least help you bootstrap back up into success.
Thank you. Next question, please. Don't be shy. Here we go. Gentleman here.
Sorry, Stuart Gillis, ADC. Do you have a straightforward list of defence in-depth measures you would put in place for any typical company to defend a control system, for example?
So there are several. It depends. This is going to be the terrible answer here. Forgive me. It depends. There's some very good stuff from, say, the National Cybersecurity Centre. Have a series of guides about some of the very basics. There's some good certifications like Cyber Essentials from the UK government that just lays out as an absolute baseline. And particularly it's relevant if you have a supply chain of other organisations working for you. You can mandate that kind of level. As you step up the risk and maturity, it then becomes back to that strategy question. What are you really worried about? What are you willing to tolerate? And that means there isn't so much. Once you've moved up from the sort of baseline, it becomes a little bit more complicated about what are the right answers. And that's where getting some advice, looking at peers, working out what threats are coming is probably the best way to guide. But the National Cybersecurity Centre has some very good, get yourself to a good state and a good level, and also covers which of those controls are particularly effective, which are more challenging to deploy.
Thank you. This gentleman here.
Hi, Jackie Doyle from Opportunity Northeast. I don't think you were suggesting it, but you did say that basically a hacker can get into any system. So therefore, the question would be, why bother about front-ending? Is it more about what you do after you've been hacked?
So a sophisticated and persistent attacker can absolutely get into everything. So as we've seen over the last few years, the people tasked with protecting our country and other countries have had security breaches in their most sensitive systems. So nobody can perpetually win at this. That's not the same as you shouldn't take reasonable precautions. You visit your doctor, am I going to live forever? It's a slightly unusual doctor who says yes. However, the doctor will say, here are some fairly basic things you can do that will make you live longer and happier. And a lot of good secure, vigilant, resilient part is about helping you live longer and making it more effort for the attacker. Most organizations are either a target of choice or a target of opportunity. There is a constant wave of attempts scanning the internet, attacking everything connected to everything, trying to do things. And those attacks will attack everybody irrespective. So if you build a certain level of protection, you'll be safe from those. Because they don't have to be that sophisticated, they're just doing everything.
Yeah, and so I think my point is, are people concentrating enough on what you do after you've been hacked, or is the emphasis more on trying to front-end it?
Yeah, and I think the change we're seeing, and definitely my advice, is put more into monitoring through vigilance and particularly resilience. It is inevitable that eventually data will be corrupted or lost, so thinking beforehand about how to recover from that, planning for it, practicing for it, puts you in a hugely better situation should it occur. So absolutely, there has traditionally been a focus very much on building a wall high enough. I think the understanding is that in a connected world, no wall is going to be guaranteed high enough. So spotting when things are going wrong and being able to recover from them is absolutely important to be balanced for all those. So, yeah.
And this gentleman here.
Hi there. Obviously, a lot of it relates to tech. But how do you get people, because I guess people are the fundamental, you can have the best tech in the world, but if people don't implement it or use it properly, then how do you defend against that?
And it's sort of this, there's a constant debate in the industry about are people our weakest link or our strongest asset? And I think both, depending on how motivated and engaged they are. Because in nearly every major attack, it has involved at some point convincing someone to do something they shouldn't have done. Perhaps through bribery, perhaps through threats, perhaps through trickster. But if your people identify that and report it, one of the great, I've touched on a couple of times, this sort of imbalance that the attacker has the advantage. When they're trying to trick your staff, you are the one who have the advantage. Because if you detect that attempt and see how they're getting in, you can warn everybody else, and then that attempt is burnt, can't be used again. And if it's a technical attack and it gets noticed, the sort of going rate for an attack on a particular brand of smartphone is about $1 million. So if your staff recognize something is odd, report that, action's taken, it's understood how the attack worked and that's reported, that has cost that attacker $1 million. They have to go and buy another one to keep doing their attacks. Spot a few of those, it starts to become economically unadvantageous for them to do so. So getting staff motivated is absolutely core. We've seen, I think I touched on it, teams doing fake phishing to measure levels of awareness as one mechanism of it, and absolutely listening to staff and getting their engagement. I think very similar to good safety culture, this involves people being bought into and seeing the value. If you apply rules that they don't see are useful and don't understand why they're doing, they will work to circumvent, and you have bright dedicated people, if they put their minds to getting around some of these controls, they will absolutely get around these controls. If you get them bought into why you're doing this, and it can be challenging with cyber because the threat is a little unclear, the risk is hard to quantify, so it's more difficult. But if you can get them bought into it, then your organisation will do well in the face of these kind of attacks.
And this gentleman here that's next to you.
Hi, kind of a follow-up question to his. How do you ideally deal with insider threat?
So I have a marvellous little sound about this, which is walk towards the problem. In nearly all the cases where insiders have caused significant disruption, they already had a grievance open with HR. Most staff do not wake up in the morning in an instant and say, I'm going to destroy this company. Normally, it takes months of active effort by the organisation to alienate and disgruntle that member of staff. And along that route, there are plenty of opportunities to catch that and deal with it that generally aren't dealt with. So making sure that line management actually pay attention and spend time with their staff. And when staff raise problems, those problems are listened to. It doesn't mean you have to do everything staff want, but nearly every case they had a grievance open that just wasn't being addressed, and people were avoiding the issue. I think it's a particularly sort of UK thing to do, is not actually directly address these things and hope it will go away. Generally, things fester rather than go away. So, but equally, you don't want to massively overreact and start security monitoring and vetting anyone who has any kind of problem. So don't run towards the problem. But if you walk towards the problem, that can really help. And the other key thing to do, I have a client, his view is he wants to shake the hand once a month of everybody who could destroy his company. And that's his way of making sure only a few people have that capability. Because once it got to several hundred, he couldn't see them all in a month. He's like, okay, too many people have that ability. Let's reduce the number of people. Let's split the company into smaller groups and have people who could, disgruntled sysadmin could wipe out this particular area, but not take out the whole group. And that's his rule of thumb. So I think get to know these people, spend time with them, and when there are problems, walk towards them. You don't have to fix them, you have to listen to them. That calms people down. People do not generally just snap and go that disgruntled.
Hi, Luca Corradi from the Oil and Gas Technology Center. What key implication and strategy do you see for the industrial Internet of Things? We have more sensors, but also actuators, and therefore, resilience is one thing you can recover, but how can you recover after something was terribly wrong on a physical?
Well, I think you see a similar question around resilience around those. What happens if we lose connectivity? There's so much benefit from the connectivity, but what is our failure model if we lose that? And equally in those cases, many of the existing designs were considered in a disconnected world that are now being connected. And that leads to a dangerous period during that transition. If you think about the threat model, who are the people who might be out to get you, consider it from that view, it becomes then possible to design these things in a way that is robust enough. So I think there's a core question to look to other industries who've gone through that process and are highly connected, see how they've learned how to operate in that model. The online tech giants, the banks, have a highly connected, highly distributed, highly targeted area for organized criminals. They've learned a lot about how you build and engineer that structure. If you apply that into the industrial Internet of Things, rather than go from you used to have to fly to the rig to operate it, now everyone on the internet has access, there are a series of steps there you can take. And there's, I think, a particular challenge in that area because patching is slow, because there's a requirement that it has to not disrupt operability and safety, and the assets are generally quite expensive, so the model of broader technology of a couple of years is out of date, throw it away, clearly doesn't apply. So pressure in the buying cycle to make sure the components the infrastructure and design you're having are built with future-proof capability within it, I think is absolutely key.
Thank you. And Gary?
Hi, I just wanted to share my experiences of cybersecurity in the last few months. Basically, I walked into a bank in Zurich, and within 5 minutes, I was in their comms room. Nobody asked me for ID. Informed the bank, went back to the bank 2 weeks later, same thing happened. But also, I've seen the other side of it. There are companies out there that use this technology for the benefit for building construction companies. They're hiring up generators. These companies don't get paid to switch off a generator. It's as simple as that. So that's the technology that's out there. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. And certainly, I've focused a lot on the technology. We talked a little bit about the people, but physical access is absolutely the core of all of this. If you can't secure the physical access to these devices, it's very hard to provide electronic security because you can circumvent so many of the controls if you have access to them.
Just to add. I did actually inform the bank.
Right.
Stephen, I have a quick question for you, and we'll go.
Of course.
What's the sort of the landscape of the people who are committing these crimes? Is it like sort of pickpocketing, where it's breadth and there's lots and lots of people with not a lot of skill, or is it a very highly educated minority who are capable of doing this?
I think what's fascinating, we see there's a whole. It's almost as if criminals have sort of taken some good sort of MBA guidance and have gone from being sort of individual crafts into industrialized processes. So you see, for instance, we touched on data and ransomware, people encrypting ransomware. The people who write the ransomware are not the people who distribute and collect the money from the ransomware. There's a small few who produce the technical innovations and deploy that. And one of the most interesting things about that ecosystem is, weirdly, the criminals who deploy ransomware for the money don't always follow the licensing terms of the software they bought from the criminals producing it. They weirdly, apparently, once you're a criminal, you're willing to break licensing agreements. So one of the fascinating questions is, how do you write security attack software that can't be misused? And what they do in the ransomware case, about every 6 months, the people at the core will publish the keys that decrypt all the data from their old versions, so the franchisees are forced to go and buy a new version. And this leads to a kind of, if you can wait, you probably will get the data back. And there's a good program being run across the EU by Europol that collects all these old keys and proves them. So if you have a ransomware problem, it's worth checking on their site to see if it's already been published. But also, writing ransomware software is quite hard. It's possible to make mistakes in it, and similar to you can break into anything. Quite often, defenders can break into encrypted systems that have been attacked and get the data back. So this has led to innovation within the criminal thing. And there's two sort of worlds you see in this. One set of ransomware people don't bother encrypting, because that's tricky and could be wrong. They just delete all the data, still ask for the money, but there is no way you're getting your money back. They're definitely all gone. But there's also no way you can recover it without paying the money, because there's no way to recover it. It's gone. The other group, I love this, don't even bother encrypting. They just tell you the data is encrypted and make money by people paying without checking. You get, I better pay and get it back quickly. And they make about as much money as the people who encrypt it, but it's far easier to write the software. So there's a fair, it's an interesting ecosystem and industry of sort of innovation, even within the criminal space. But I think given the barrier to entry is relatively low, the likelihood of getting caught is relatively low, you could operate globally and there are reasonable returns, it is a growth area, unfortunately, about people focusing on this as a mechanism to commit crime if they're led to thinking crime is a inevitable point where they've ended up.
Thank you, I think. Luca, do you have a question?
You partially answered already. Is staying on the cyber criminal side of it. Even recording is not accurate, of course, is massively underestimated. Recently talked with the police and basically said that you record as an incident in Scotland, but if it doesn't originate, it's not recorded as a crime in Scotland. And most of these attacks are generated in Eastern Europe or other places. So shall we assume impunity and therefore just focus on what we do with it?
So I didn't quite follow that. Forgive me.
The chances of getting caught is relatively low,
right,
as you said.
Yes.
To the point of impunity, what is the statistics? How many people have been arrested for these attacks?
Yes,
for
and you
serious
see,
ones?
it's a stated goal of the UK's National Cyber Crime Unit. Their goal is to go after not the pickpockets at the bottom of this structure, but instead disrupt the few who are actually writing this. And they had a recent arrest. There was a person whose service they offered is, if you've written some malware and you want to see if it will be detected, he ran a whole sort of warehouse full of systems running every possible configuration of security tools, and he would run your malware through and let you know, no, that one's getting caught because of this, you need to adapt it like this, and it'll work. Now, by taking him out and arresting him, that's removed the capability for all the criminals who were using that. So they're deliberately targeting. And what's fascinating about this, both for criminals, But also, I think most telling, I'm very pleased I've always been on the defense side, because increasingly nations are prosecuting people operating for other nations. So there are several arrest warrants out in Western states for people from the Far East operating on behalf of their nation, and vice versa. The leaks from some of the intelligence agencies over here have identified individuals who carried out these kind of attacks, who are long since retired and moved into other areas, but now can't travel globally because. So I think the immediate chance of getting caught is very low, but the internet never forgets. And increasingly, these things are eventually getting caught. And in a world where many of the attackers think there are no consequences, even small consequences radically change the balance of their thought. So I think we are seeing law enforcement globally taking steps. And I hope the takeaway is not brilliant cybercrime, it's a growth industry, let's go out and get hacking. The defenders will eventually get everybody because, back to the attackers always win, the attackers cannot defend their infrastructure well enough to stop law enforcement getting in and finding out exactly what's going on. So eventually everyone will get caught. So I don't recommend it as a career. I hope that's clear. Firmly come to the defending side. We might not get as much pay, but we're definitely happier people. And our year-end appraisals are nowhere near as brutal as organised crime. So it's a much better place.
Okay, so we've got 2 minutes left, so one more question.
I'm just wondering, how easy is it to follow the trail? Like you were saying that you found the other company who you're hacking in and you followed them around. How easy is that to do? Because I know that with VPNs and stuff, people can be, like they were saying, in Scotland, but actually the VPNs in India or China or something like that. So how easy is it to follow that trail and catch them?
So there's two marvellous recent cases. One, a particular organisation was trying to disrupt an election in another country and forgot one time to turn on their VPN and connected directly. So it was clear what state organisation they were connecting from. In another one, the defenders hacked into the security cameras in the building where they traced them back to and had footage of various foreign governments meeting with the team doing the hacking from having hacked their security cameras. So in order to disguise your behaviour, you have to get it right every time, and the level of monitoring and review is relatively high. So I think it's possible. What we also see is active work by nearly everybody in this space trying to frame each other. So it's always good, whenever anyone breaks in, they leave a bit of Chinese text around in the hope that will pass blame to somebody else. And because this is all based on data from computers, the computers might be lying about the logs they're providing, it does get quite difficult to track down who is behind these things. So it's not easy, but equally this idea, if I install this software through this VPN, I'll be safe on the internet, that's not good advice.
Thank you. Okay, and I think that's all we've got time for today. So thank you, Stephen, for what was an excellent and informative and slightly scary talk. And ask you to show your appreciation, please. And as ever, we do ask you if you can just sort of move out the hub for now. You are more than welcome to carry on any discussions upstairs at the front. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thanks, and keep on. Enjoy your talk. I'm going to ask how. Yeah.
Maybe sec.
Good questions, as I worried. I suspected you might have. Don't you hate that? Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. Thank you.